Just because something's not in the headlines doesn't mean it shouldn't be. This matter of Iran is a very, very big deal. And depending on the outcome, it could have consequences either very positive or very negative for generations to come. And so it's something I'm not going to let go of. It's something that we're going to continue to explore. And so let's dig into this a little bit further and a little bit differently, given what we know right now. I went back and I reread President Trump's book, The Art of the Deal. I recommend you take another look at that book because it kind of explains what the president is up to. You don't just jump into a deal and make a deal. Sometimes you walk away from a deal. A lot of it is like playing poker. You don't show your hand, you don't have facial motions, and so forth and so on. It's quite a brilliant book, and that's why I think Donald Trump is a brilliant negotiator and has been brilliant as president. That said, the Islamist regime in Iran, they have their own ideology and their own techniques too. So I want to get into both of these. In the end, diplomacy by itself is not going to work. In fact, it can't work. Not because of President Trump, but because of the Iranian regime's ideology. Let me repeat that. Diplomacy cannot work, not because of President Trump, but because of the Iranian regime's ideology. If the president is using diplomacy like I believe he is, like I hope he is, like I pray he is, as really a military tactic, it's genius. But if anybody believes that diplomacy is going to work, diplomacy as diplomacy, they're dead wrong. Now, if they have to, in their minds, the Iranian regime will wait out President Trump, will wait out all presidents who they think are a problem. 3 years for President Trump, that's nothing to these people. Absolutely nothing. Their short-term goal is to avoid and delay regime change. For the regime, delay means survival. For our country, delay means it will be left to our children to deal with an Iranian regime that has tens of thousands of ballistic missiles, scores and scores of nuclear warheads, and a rebirth through consolidation of power internally and subsidies and support from China, Russia, North Korea, and others. An utter human disaster for the Iranian people and the rest of the world, particularly since Iran has never been weaker. Iran has never been weaker in 47 years. It has no Air Force effectively. It has no Navy effectively. As a matter of fact, President Reagan destroyed their Navy in about 3 hours, most of it, as a response to their attacks on one of our ships. And they have no effective ground-to-air missile systems or effective radar systems. They have some, but not enough to matter, really, because they were eliminated in the 12-day war by the Israelis. It's only going to get much more difficult and complicated as time goes on. It's going to get worse. And the truth is, it would be utterly irresponsible and immoral for us, this generation, we, to leave to our children and grandchildren, the next generations, for them to deal with it. And how are they going to deal with it as the Iranian regime builds up? If that regime survives, it will continue slaughtering and imprisoning the Iranian people at will. It will aggressively seek to tighten control over its country. It will continue with a campaign of delay and subterfuge with our country in the West, with international organizations and so forth. It will never abandon its nuclear program. It will never abandon its ballistic ICBM program. In short, the Iranian regime will never surrender its very purpose for existing, to destroy us and the West. Again, it's a 7th century barbaric Islamist regime. It is a terror state. It is a death cult, and it believes God is on their side. The Western mindset is simply unwilling or incapable of getting its collective head around this. For the Iranian regime, negotiations and diplomacy are a means to an end, much like with the communists, the ends justify the means. But to be clear, an Islamist terrorist primitive regime with cutting-edge, advanced missile systems and nuclear weapons is the worst possible combination. Any regime that is willing to murder 50,000 of its own people in a few days, and they'd be happy to murder 1 million of them. Won't think twice before using an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead to attack the continental United States. I've been saying that we need to look at North Korea as an example of what negotiations and diplomacy do when you're dealing with a regime that uses negotiations and diplomacy to their advantage. But before we get there, more on the mindset of this Islamist Nazi regime that we're dealing with. In American Foreign Policy, James Robbins, some time ago, he pointed out, since the return of the Ayatollah Khomeini I from exile in 1979 and the advent of the Islamic Revolution, Tehran has consistently stressed several ideological themes: the supremacy of Shia Islam, particularly over the Sunni sect, the unity of religion, government, and daily life under the Quran, the extension of its regional and global influence, and the destruction of Iran's enemies, particularly Israel and the United States. Iran, in other words, is not just a Middle Eastern adversary state with dreams of regional hegemony, but a revolutionary regime seeking to reshape the region's map and the world's belief system. As such, normalizing relations with the West represents a threat to the Iranian regime's core beliefs and mission. It will use the appearance as camouflage of normalizing relations, but it doesn't believe in it. Iran's nuclear weapons program fits into this same framework. It represents a symptom of Tehran's worldview, not a cause. Absent the Islamic Republic's revolutionary aspirations, there would be no need to acquire weapons of mass destruction, build terror networks, proselytize Shiite beliefs, or engage in any other destabilizing actions. But so long as Iran remains a revisionist power, it cannot be counted on to moderate its behavior. It's certainly not going to do it through some paper agreement with the United States. It hates us the most. A great piece a few months back in Gatestone Institute paper by Majid Rafizadeh. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a revolutionary state deeply committed to an ideological mission that transcends conventional diplomacy. Its very core identity is rooted in anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, and the goal of exporting its revolutionary ideas worldwide. The ideological foundation is not just some negotiable policy, but an unshakable pillar of the regime's existence. If the Islamic Republic were to abandon these principles, it would not merely be modifying its foreign policy, it would be dismantling its own identity. The regime cannot and will not abandon its hostility toward the United States and Israel. Doing so would strip it of the very ideology that justifies its rule. The Western dream has been that economic benefits, integration into the global system, and negotiations could push Iran to abandon its radical policies and support for terror groups. But Iran has mostly used negotiations as a tool to buy time, secure economic relief, then continue its military buildup. Iran's regime has never wavered from its core mission, which is to spread its revolutionary Islamist ideology and challenge the global order that it views as corrupt and dominated by the West, we, the United States. Iran's constitution explicitly enshrines its mission to export its revolution abroad. Article 11 states that the government considers the continuation of the Islamic Revolution at home and abroad as its duty, quote unquote. Article 154 states that the Islamic Republic, quote, supports the just struggles of the oppressed against the arrogant everywhere in the world. This language is not mere rhetoric. It is the foundation upon which the entire state apparatus operates. And he goes on. The reason Iran's regime does not govern with Western rational statecraft, while national interests dictate policy adjustments in response to incentives. Instead, the Islamic Republic of Iran is a revolutionary state deeply committed to an ideological mission that transcends conventional diplomacy. Its very core identity is rooted in anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, and the goal of exporting the revolutionary ideals worldwide. This ideological foundation is not just some negotiable policy, but an unshakable pillar of the regime's existence. If the Islamic Republic were to abandon these principles, it would not merely be modifying its foreign policy, it would be dismantling its own identity. The regime cannot and will not abandon its hostility toward the United States and Israel. Doing so would strip it of the very ideology that justifies its rule. I'm spending time on this so we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Diplomacy means nothing to these people, to this regime. The whole point, they believe, is to delay us so they can continue to build up. I'm hoping, and I believe the president's point is the same. Excuse us. We're building up so we can take you out, because we are not going to leave you and your missiles and your nuclear technology and all the rest to our children and grandchildren. Let's dig a little deeper. Ready? The doctrine of taqiyya. We've talked about this. The sanctioned concealment of one's belief when expression might endanger the community or its objectives. In other words, the sanctioning of lying and deceiving. In classical Shi'ism, taqiyya was a religious duty under the weight of Sunni domination. In the political culture of Islamic Republic, it has evolved into a legitimate tool of foreign policy. For decades, the West has sought to compel Iran into rational dialogue, first through economic sanctions, then through shows of military force. But from the standpoint of revolutionary Islamic doctrine, the greater the external pressure, the higher the religious value of taqiyya as a God-sanctioned strategy. It is precisely under such conditions that a concession or the promise of one can be justified not as a genuine compromise, but as a sacred means of preserving resources and buying time. She goes on. After the 1979 revolution's victory came the next act, the purification of the Islamic Republic from Marxists, liberals, Fedayeen, and dissenting clerics. At this stage, maslaha, no longer an abstract principle, became a justification for state violence. In his 1988 letter establishing the Expediency Council, Khomeini, the first, declared unequivocally that the expediency of the Islamic system was so essential that resisting it could undermine the very mission of the religion to defend the oppressed. This was a direct theological sanction for censorship, repression, and exception-making, so long as it preserved the system's survival. The system, meaning the regime, must survive at all costs, hence, genocide is justified. Taqiyya was no longer a sign of weakness. It had become a technology of power, embedded in the strategic logic of the Islamic State. The system Khomeini, the current Khomeini, has constructed is deliberately rooted in strategic ambiguity. That is, its nature is such that commitments, at least as understood in Western diplomatic tradition, are not merely dismissed, but fundamentally non-existent as enduring principles. Sure, we'll agree to that, when they really don't. The Islamic Republic's ideological apparatus does not so much violate agreements as it designs them from the outset to be provisional and reversible. Negotiations, concessions, and formal deals are not indications of compromise, but tactical maneuvers, instruments to preserve and accumulate strength for long-term objectives. This is the core dilemma facing the United States, Israel, and the Western allies today. Can one forge a lasting agreement within a state whose very structure precludes negotiability in the conventional sense? Decades of experience suggest otherwise. Time and again, the West has misread Iran's tactical concessions as signs of a strategic policy shift, but these gestures are not de-escalation in any meaningful sense. The Islamic Republic's governing system does not merely tolerate ambiguity, it is architected around it. Now, I talked about North Korea earlier, and I want to get to this quickly. See, the communist mentality and this Islamist mentality are similar. Now, they're different in significant ways, but they're similar too. The ends justify the means. That was credited to Lenin. Others have said it as well. The ends justify the means. Paper agreements mean nothing. Nothing. We had these negotiations with North Korea for a long, long time. The Congressional Research Service pointed out, and I mentioned North Korea because they have now 50 nuclear warheads. They build 5 or 6 a year. And we had all kinds of negotiations and concessions, and we worked with them, and we subsidized them, and we funded them, and we denuclearized South Korea. They were supposed to denuclearize. They agreed and then lied, agreed and then lied, and here they are now, a nuclear power. The United States has engaged in 5 major sets of formal nuclear and missile negotiations with North Korea. See, we've been here before. The bilateral agreed framework, 1994 to 2002. Bilateral missile negotiations, 1996 to 2000. The multilateral six-party talks, 2003 to 2009. The bilateral Leap Day deal, 2012. And top-level summit meetings and letter exchanges between President Trump and North Korean leader Un. In general, the formula for these negotiations has been for North Korea to halt, and in some cases disable, its nuclear missile programs in return for economic and diplomatic incentives, including the promise of better U.S.-North Korean relations and of a formal end to the Korean War. All 5 diplomatic efforts resulted in agreement. 2, the agreed framework, 6-party talks, produced tangible reductions in North Korea's existing capabilities. Even those achievements proved fleeting when the 2 agreements eventually collapsed. Oh, we had deals with North Korea. 1985 Non-Proliferation Agreement, 1992 Joint Declaration of Denuclearization, 1994 U.S.-North Korea Agreed Framework, 1999 Missile Testing Moratorium, 2005 Six-Party Talks Joint Statement, 2012 Leap Day Agreement, 2018 Singapore Summit Joint Statement. Deals, diplomacy, negotiations. 2018 Comprehensive Military Agreement, 2024 Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And you know, we weren't alone. The UN had all kinds of resolutions against North Korea, believe it or not, all kinds of resolutions. UN Security Council, not just the General Assembly. We had the Security Council Resolution 1718, the Security Council Resolution 1874, Security Council Resolution 2087, Security Council Resolution 2094. Oh, there's more. Security Council Resolution 2270. We had Security Council Resolution 2321. We had Security Council Resolution 2375. And then we had Security Council Resolution 2379. All put economic sanctions on, travel sanctions on, embargoes on, attacking individuals, limiting meetings, and on and on. I mean, it was beautiful. The conditions, the restrictions, they were unbelievable. But North Korea is a concentration camp, and they didn't care. It's led by one family. Iran doesn't care. It's led by Khomeini and one regime. It will kill, it will slaughter, it will negotiate, it will enter into diplomacy, it will play the game. They view the West as weak, and many in the West are weak. They think the West will take a deal. They're going to play tough. Maybe they'll play tough to the end. Who knows? But I got to believe, seeing President Trump in action, knowing President Trump, reading again The Art of the Deal, that he knows what he's up against and that he would never, ever leave it to our children and grandchildren to deal with this evil, genocidal, mass-murdering regime of the 7th century. The fact that we destroyed their nuclear sites, it's obvious they're still pushing to build more nukes, or we wouldn't be negotiating with them on at all. And the people of Iran, they deserve our help. They deserve our support. They haven't stopped slaughtering. They are slaughtering left and right. They are imprisoning left and right. That is the regime. I can't think of any reason not to take this regime out. It won't be easy. But it's not China, it's not Russia, it's not even North Korea. They're weaker than they ever were. Now's the time.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.